Ben Schumaker is Schumaker's son.
You got it.
Online with us. And I take it, Ben, that's one of the pictures that maybe is part of your project?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, that was painted by a Syrian artist who I met in a Syrian refugee camp. And he painted that on the back of a canvas tent from the United Nations.
Oh, my goodness.
When the refugees originally settled in that camp and the UN handed out these canvas tents, after a while, they replaced them with metal cubes for people to live in. And so he cut some up and painted on them.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Well, in our emailing back and forth, I don't remember what your background is, so I'm going to let you go ahead and give us some background on what your regular job is, not your volunteer job, and then please just go ahead and jump into whichever the Afghan experience you had or the pictures, whichever one you want to go first. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Well, this running the memory project is actually the only job I've ever had. I started it in college 18 years ago, and it's been my full-time job ever since. So the presentation I have today is a little about the memory project itself, about portraits for children around the world, and then how that led me to connect with this Afghan family that I became very involved in helping resettle in Canada. So I see we have another person coming. Hello. And so it's my understanding that part of the purpose of this presentation to your group is that some people in your church community are interested in helping resettle refugee families. So as I said to Carmen in an email, I don't really have any experience helping refugee families resettle in the United States. I just really have this one family of helping, or one story of helping one Afghan family resettle in Canada. But she thought it would still be worthwhile to share, just in terms of, all of the complexities that arise when helping a family move across the world, and all of the incredible amounts of paperwork and all sorts of hurdles, cultural hurdles. So the presentation I have, this is a presentation I've given to a few other groups over the last couple of months. It is basically a series of photos that I will show you photos and then I'll narrate as I go. So you probably won't see my face on the screen as much as the photos, but then when I'm finished, I'll come back to the screen and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Okay.
So if that sounds good, I need to share the screen.
We were told that was going to be okay. There you go. Yep.
Okay, so do you see a whole bunch of children's portraits here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then we're in the business. There's actually a very short game we can play here. When I made this collage of portraits, I didn't realize that I accidentally included 2 duplicates in it. So if you want, I can give you about 5 or 10 seconds to try to spot the duplicate, and then I'll point it out. It's hard to see them on all the faces, but I'll give you a hint. It's in the 3rd row. It's a boy in the 3rd row. And you can see it's the boy on the far left in the 3rd row, and then that portrait is repeated over towards the right in the 3rd row. So let's see here. So this is, oops. Okay, so the memory project began in 2004 when I had finished college at UW-Madison, and I went to Guatemala to volunteer at an orphanage. And this orphanage was a very unique place because it was located on a river and only accessible by boat. So this was a common scene because it was so hot there. The children always liked to swim in the river, and that was one of the best things they could do for fun. But I had a new camera with me. This was before digital cameras were mainstream. So I had a film camera, and I was taking photos of the kids. And a Guatemalan man there at the orphanage said to me, you know, when you go back to the US, you should really have copies printed of those photos and send them here for the children. Because he explained, I grew up in an orphanage here. I've never even seen a photo of myself as a child, and I don't have any keepsakes to help me remember those early years. So that really struck me as very profound. And I had always enjoyed doing portraits in high school art class at Marshfield Senior High. And I knew that that was a very powerful way to connect with another person, to have to stare into a photo of their face and capture every detail of their eyes and their smile. So I thought, well, sure, we can print photos of these kids, but what if we had high school art students create, beautiful handmade portraits for them as really special gifts? And that would not only provide the children with a special memory from their early years, but it would also help American high school students come face to face with kids around the world and think about the world and all the things we have in common, and develop that sense of international friendship and connection for the youth on both sides. So as you can see, a lot of, there's so much talent in our high school art classrooms, and a lot of students can create just beautiful work. So this just shows a series of, this is a high school student receiving a photo of a boy from an orphanage in Thailand. And she made this portrait and it was delivered to the boy. Here's another one, same girl at the same orphanage, and just beautiful portrait. And one more. These photos that I'm showing you right now were actually part of an exhibit at the US State Department headquarters in 2010. So that was quite a high honor for these students. So I just wanted to show you what goes on the back of each portrait. We have a photo of the child who will receive the portrait, and then a photo of the US art student who created it. And actually, you can't see it on this photo, but on the back of the artwork, the US art students always trace their hands as well, so that the foreign children can put their hand on that tracing and feel like they're touching hands with them.
Oh.
So I started this in 2004. It spread into schools around the country. We started having thousands of students participating every year. And this photo brings us up to 2016. And this was actually a very special photo for me because it was in a Syrian refugee camp, the same one that I showed you where I got that the painting behind me. And this was, you'll remember in 2016 with the election, there was a lot of discussion in our country about foreign people and Muslim people in particular, and a lot of it wasn't so kind and welcoming. So a lot of the students in our program were very interested in creating portraits for Syrian children. And so we reached out to our embassy in Jordan, and they put me in touch with UNICEF in the refugee camp, and we made portraits for these kids. And this was actually very unique timing when we delivered these portraits, because I think it was January 2017 is when you might remember the so-called Muslim ban went into effect that prevented Syrian refugees from coming to our country for a while. And so all of that happened just 2 weeks before these photos were taken. So all of the families in the camp had received that message from our government, but here we were in the camp delivering a totally different kind of message of friendship from youth to youth through art. And for the girls in particular, this was really a wild experience to know that someone on the other side of the world who they'd never met had put this time and care into creating these portraits for them. So now this is in Afghanistan. And so we took that same way of thinking about trying to reach out to countries and cultures that are very different from our own, where we have perhaps some political or cultural or religious tension, and trying to use this experience of portraiture as a way of uniting youth on both sides and helping them see humanity in each other, help them see each other, in each other's eyes, so to speak. So we did the project in Afghanistan for 4 years before the Taliban took over. And I was just so thankful that we were able to do this with thousands of girls there. And they just, for them, again, this was just absolutely a wild experience, like nothing they had ever received or experienced before in terms of an international connection. Here they are after school running home to show their families. This guy is actually the Minister of Education for all of Afghanistan at the time. This photo was taken in 2021. And he came to an event to present the portraits to all of these girls as sort of a way of recognizing everything that they were doing to receive an education in a country in which many girls don't get the chance to go to school at all. And you can see they were quite proud of their portraits and knowing that that was, made for them as a way of cheering them on in their education. So this young woman here is named Rabina, and she was the person who helped us coordinate this activity at many girls' schools. Here she is handing portraits out. She basically went to all of the schools and delivered all of the portraits on our behalf and explained the project to the girls. So when the Taliban took over Afghanistan in August of last year, I was just so devastated after knowing that we had this special connection with so many girls there, and that all of those girls had dreams, for education and things they could be in an open and free Afghanistan. And then to know that that was just shut down overnight on August 15th of last year, and that none of these girls would be able to go to school anymore, was just absolutely heartbreaking. And I really wanted to do something to help. I'll just stay there for a moment, to help Rabina's family, because I knew that they were in a very precarious situation. Her father was killed long ago, and so I knew she had just a widowed mother, and they were living on the edge of poverty. And so I thought, there's no way she's going to be able to have a quality of life in Afghanistan anymore. And so I reached out to her and said, what can I do to help? And she said, well, we need to escape. We need to go to Pakistan. And could you help us do that? And I thought, well, I have, that's a really crazy question, and I don't know how, but we could try. So now let me tell you, just to segue, this is where they are from in Afghanistan originally. This is where her mother was born, in the Panjshir Valley. And that's actually her sister Sabria in the photo. So this is her mother. And I want to tell you her mother's story because to me, it's extremely inspiring, and she's quite a hero for what she did. This was a photo taken of her as a teenager in Iran. And she actually doesn't know when she was born, because being born in a rural area in Afghanistan, they weren't recording births at the time. And so for her, no one in her family knows when they were born. They barely can guess at what year it was. So she thinks she's currently 46, but she said that could be, between 45 or 47. So when the Taliban took over the first time, her father had died when she was young, but she went to Iran with her older brothers and her widowed mother. And this photo was taken there as the older brothers arranged for her to be married to this man, Mahbubullah. So this is the only photo that exists in the world of Mahbubullah, who is Rabina's father. And tragically, he was killed shortly after they were married. So that left Shaima back in Afghanistan after our military went in 2001, kicked out the Taliban. A lot of Afghan refugees went back to Afghanistan. and including Shima. And she went back to her home village and said to her brothers, can I come back into the family home? Because I have these 3 children now and I don't have any job, I don't have any way to survive. Can I live at our family home again? Because, as you might know, in their culture, once a woman is married off into another family, she's basically part of that family and no longer part of the original family. And her brothers said to her, well, sure, you can come back into our family if you abandon those 3 children. So, leave the children at an orphanage, then you can come back and we will arrange for you to be married to another man, because we need you to bring honor to our family, and you'll only bring honor to us if we can marry you to another man, but no man will marry you if you have those 3 children. So get rid of the kids and then everything will be fine. And she's a hero now for me, because she made the very courageous decision to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep the children, even though she knew that she was headed off into one of the poorest countries on earth that has one of the worst records of women's, one of the worst situations for women, horrible women's rights records. And she knew that she'd be living hand to mouth and didn't know how she would do it, but she knew that she wanted to try to raise her children. So she went to an orphanage, and this photo was taken at the orphanage, and she was able to stay there for about 6 months before she was able to get a small home in a slum area of Kabul for widowed mothers. And now these are the kids you can see growing up. Rabina is the tallest one there. And then the 2 other kids are twins, a boy and a girl, Sabria and Mustafa. So another reason why Shima is a hero to me is because even though she was living in dire poverty and she was working as hard as she could, she got a job cleaning at a guest house or a hotel, cleaning and cooking. She never had the opportunity to go to school when she was a girl. So she, never learned to read or write, but she was able to cook and clean and made just enough money to help her family survive. And she took in 2 more children who didn't have a family and were homeless there in Kabul. And she raised those 2 children for 10 years, along with her own 3 kids. So now you see the family, the 3 kids are as teenagers, they're celebrating Rabina's birthday. And at this time, once the kids got older, they could start working as well and trying to help and earn money. And the family, this photo was taken in the summer of 2021, before the Taliban took over. Just for a couple of years before the Taliban took over, they finally had a somewhat comfortable life. They were out of dire poverty, and they would be considered, low income, but they at least had some comforts in life and were able to enjoy their time in Kabul. And Rabina, was involved with a U.S. organization that I partnered with, which is why she was the one helping us with all the portraits. So then came August 15th of last year, when the Taliban took over, and I had reached out to her to say, how can I help you? I'm devastated for you. And she sent me this photo and said, we're terrified. We don't think we can survive here. We need to get out. We need to go to Pakistan. And can you help us do that? So I had been doing the memory project in Pakistan as well. And I actually did have some connections there. So I said, well, let me call a guy that I know. So I called a Pakistani man who had been my guide when I was in Pakistan. And I explained the situation to him and said, is there any way that you could drive to the border and help them? If they're able to cross the border, could you collect them in your van and drive them to safety? And he said, he knew this was a huge personal risk, because he caught transporting Afghans into Pakistan illegally, could land him in big trouble. But he wanted to help, and he said, yes, if they can cross the border, I'll be waiting there. So they went to an area of Afghanistan that is sort of somewhat lawless, and it's kind of a no man's land. And this is Rabina as she was contemplating crossing the border. And it took them 5 days. Every day, she would text me and say, we didn't make it today. We got turned around today. But finally on the 5th day, my guide from Pakistan sent me this photo showing that he had picked them up in his van along with another family that they crossed with. And that was just, as you can imagine, it was an amazing photo to receive because it had been incredibly stressful knowing that they were in this precarious situation. Shaima, the mother, is on the far left of this photo. Rabina is the one with the mask on, and her sister Sabria is seated behind her. And then her brother Mustafa is in the very far back. And the other guy with holding the 2 fingers up is a dad of another family. So then I flew to Pakistan to meet them there and help them get set up in a little room to rent and brought them some cash because as Afghans who are in Pakistan without documents, they had no rights whatsoever. They couldn't use any, I could have just sent them money by Western Union, but it was impossible because they weren't able to use Western Union. They weren't able to use anything at all. If they were discovered there, they could hypothetically be arrested, detained, or sent back to Afghanistan since they didn't have visas. So this was, when I was there and I sat down with them, I said to Shaima, the mother, I said, I promise you that I will stay with your family symbolically. I will be with you, even when I'm back in Wisconsin, I'll be with you every day, trying to help you make it to another country because Pakistan, they'd never be able to be in Pakistan legally and have a life there or work there or go to school there. So I said, I promise I will help you, come to the United States or another country. And when I made that promise, I really thought that it was feasible. And I thought that the United States and the Biden administration would open doors to allow citizens who wanted to help to do so. Because, everything that we heard in the news in late August of last year was that from the Biden administration was that we're going to get our allies out. We're going to help you come to the United States. So that's why I made that promise to them. And then over the months that followed, it ended up being one of the most stressful experiences of my life because I saw doors closing, all of those avenues that I thought that I could utilize to bring the family to the United States started to close as the Afghan situation faded from the media and our government looked elsewhere. So I was then really stressed out because I had made this promise and I didn't know how I could keep it anymore. But amazingly, this woman came to the rescue. You'll recognize Malala, the Nobel laureate. I happened to have a connection with her organization, the Malala Fund, and they had been invited as a special privilege by the government of Canada to refer women's rights workers for resettlement in Canada. And they agreed to refer Rabina because of all the work she had done for girls in Kabul. And so the government of Canada accepted them, and that was amazing. They got accepted to this program in December of 2021, but we still didn't know what would happen. We still didn't know how long it would take for them to be able to go to Canada. There was so much paperwork involved, and we actually didn't know what would happen when they went to the airport to fly. And even the Canadian diplomat told the family, look, you're here in Pakistan illegally. And when you go to the airport and show your passports and the Pakistani immigration officer realizes that you came here illegally, he said, I'm not sure what they'll do about that. They might detain you, they might deport you to Afghanistan, or they might not care and they might just let you go and get on the plane. And he said, are you going to take that risk? And they said, yes, we have to. So when they went to the airport, it was extremely stressful, but also hopeful. And if they could make it, it would be a whole new life for them. And I knew they were in the immigration line. And then suddenly Rabina sent me this photo, which is a very boring photo, just shows a floor. But when she sent me this photo, in an instant, I knew that they were inside the airport and they had been allowed to pass through the immigration counter and they would be allowed to take their flight And sure enough, she sent me this photo of them on an airplane for the first time in their lives on their way out of Pakistan. And next thing you know, we were sledding in Canada. I flew up there and met them, and we bought these sleds at a hardware store for $5. And we had a blast playing in the snow. It was their first time ever going sledding. We made snow angels. We had a snowball fight. They posed for photos. And it was a wonderful day. This was in Winnipeg, just north of Minnesota. And, you know, I just it was an amazing experience, because here, you know, Shima had taken this risk many years ago of saying, I'm not going to abandon my children. I'm going to stick with them, and I'm going to somehow make it happen. And after this incredibly long series of events and struggles, finally she was in a safe place with her kids and had this new open life ahead of them. So that's essentially the story of how, you know, I was involved with this one family coming to Canada. And since then, I've visited them in Canada 4 times. I've brought my daughter with me 2 times. And it's wonderful. They've been there now for 6 months, and little by little, there's been a lot of culture shock. They've had to learn a lot of new things. When they first arrived there and they saw there were no leaves on the trees, they even asked me, so here in Canada, do the trees ever have leaves? And I said, yes, in summer they'll grow leaves, you know. We were out, you know, I took them out and about on on that day that we went sledding, and we were inside of a building, and Sabria, the teenager, asked me, I'm thirsty. How do I get water here? And I pointed to a water fountain, and I said, well, you can drink from there. And she said, well, what's that? You know, so he showed her, this is how you push the button and water comes out. So there was so many things for them to learn. And it's quite incredible now. That's Sabria, the same one who asked how to drink water from a water fountain, is now a student at a community college, and she's studying as a full-time college student. So it's incredible how much progress can be made in 6 months. So that's the summary of my involvement.